We are delighted to be joined by Jean-Pierre Mustier. Mr. Mustier, thank you. Now, we were just saying in the introduction there that you said you could look at providing extraordinary capital distribution. When will you decide whether to increase dividend payouts to 50% of 2020 earnings?
Well, good morning, Francine. We will decide early next year at the close of our 2020 results whether we increase our payout to 50% of our net income, and we will see as well if we have an extra dividend to be paid on top of the 50%.
And so that depends on what, the execution of your business plan?
It depends, of course, on the execution of the business plan, but also on the change of the regulatory environment. There has been a new rule being put in place by the ECB for the real insider. It's called the CRD5 Article 104, which will bring to all European banks an extra bonus, if I may say, in terms of regulatory capital.
But when you talk about the increase in payout, is it definitely through dividends, or could it also be a share buyback?
We will see. You're too curious. We will decide at the time. Today, of course, with the share price where it is, bringing extra dividend in cash makes sense, but a share buyback makes a lot of sense as well.
Give me a sense of what your biggest risk, Mr. Mustier, is to your business plan right now.
It is clearly the environment and whether the economy will remain weak or weaker. And if the ECB cuts rate again, negative rates have a very negative impact on the profitability of banks. We don't think it is the case. We think that the ECB will normalize, but one never knows.
Okay, have you had discussions with the European Central Bank? Do they understand the plight that European banks are going through because of negative rates?
They do. The European Central Bank is actually very proactive in order to exchange with banks, not only on the monetary side where they interact with us, but also on the regulatory side. And I have to say that the new head of the single supervisory mechanism, Mr. Enria, has been very transparent about regulatory headwinds, which I think is a plus for investors. They have better visibility about European banks. We should bring more capital into European banks.
Does tiering work?
Tiering is works a little bit because it amortizes a little bit the impact of negative rates. But I think negative rates in general is an issue if they stay lower for longer.
What's your take on the Italian banking landscape overall? We're seeing better profits. Are we at, on the other side? Are you seeing light at the end of the tunnel?
I think the sector has made a lot of progress in the past few years. If you look at us, we reduced our non-performing loan by 50 billion in 3 years. That's quite a large amount. And all the banks made progress. The system is in better shape, ready to finance the economy.
Italian banks, I think, outperformed European banks since the beginning of the year. Why is that?
Because Italian banks are very good.
Okay, but was there a discount before that people now see value in?
I think people can see value in Italian banks and can see that the overall framework in Italy might be more stable right now, with a country which has a lot of assets and a lot of positive, very competitive SMEs, which are very good, and a population which is consuming and which is a wealthy population. So all in all, a good prospect for Italy and its economy, I think, despite negative print of the GDP last quarter. I think it's only technical, and we're positive about the year.
Do you think there'll be consolidation amongst the Popolari banks in Italy?
It's not for me to comment. We said as far as UniCredit is concerned, no M&A. So it is very clear.
I was going to ask you about consolidation. Do rumors about consolidation make a difference to your strategy?
It does not. For us, it is very clear for the new plan, which is called Team 23, no M&A. We work on our organic plan. And in the current environment, transformation of a bank is much more important than acquisition.
I think last time we spoke, I was asking you what would trigger M&A amongst two-tier banks. And you told me the share price. Is it still the case, or is there something else on regulation?
I think the regulation is improving these days, and the ECB has said that they want to be much more transparent about the impact of regulatory headwinds and the regulatory evolution. I think no M&A is coming from two things. One is transformation is the most important issue for banks today. And of course, at a share price which is low for the European banking sector in general, it is very difficult to consider any combination which could be EPS accretive.
Are European banks strong enough to withstand a possible big fight between London and the rest of Europe when it comes to equivalency?
Yes, they are. I mean, European banks are in a very good shape. They build up their capital. Profitability is on the rise. Clearly, I mean, there is, with Brexit, some consequences. I would say they are more technical than anything else. For instance, on the clearing side, for instance, on the, the equivalence of some of the derivative contract. But these are technical issues which will be solved.
When I asked you, of course, the biggest risk to your business plan, and you tell me the economy, is that Brexit? Is that negative rates that you mentioned? But is there anything else? How do you deal with the virus, for example?
Well, for the moment, we have not seen any impact of the virus. We, of course, take steps in order to protect our team members and make sure that we have a contingency plan for our customers. We will see if the supply chain is impacted in the future, but we have no sign of it for the moment.
Where could the biggest risk for the economy actually come from, leaving aside negative rates?
I think it's clearly lower growth for longer, which for Western Europe, will mean lower rates for longer as well, and that will be an issue for the banks. This is not our best case, but that's a risk that we have to be mindful of.
Mr. Mustier, when you look at the banking union, does Germany have enough political capital to try and push this through?
I think the banking union for me is not about having a single deposit insurance scheme. It is about making sure that the banking sector is seen in Europe as one sector. When I speak to US investors, they invest in US banks, not in a bank of the state of New York or the state of California. When they look at Europe, they invest in an Italian bank, UniCredit of course, but also in a German bank or French bank. They don't look at European banks. So the banking union is about making sure we have European banks.
But you think there's a push, a real push in Germany to put the money where they said they would do it and go through with it soon? I
think it's unlikely from my point of view that we will see a banking union as far as the European deposit insurance scheme is concerned.
Talk to me about regulatory hurdles. Do you think that's it for European banks, or are we going to see more? Have we seen the biggest burden when it comes to costs and regulation?
I think we have seen all the burden, if you want, announced. And the new head of the SSM, as I said, Mr. Enria, has been very clear and very transparent about what they are. Visibility and understanding about this regulatory evolution, whatever could be the level of capital, is absolutely key. And the ECB is going in the right direction. It's perfect. Congratulations to him.
Mr. Mustier, when you speak to investors, what do they ask you the most?
Well, they ask me about distribution to investors. We have announced this increase of payout to 50% last year that we might consider in early 2021. I think it's important for investors. And of course, they look at the development of UniCredit. We finished our first plan, Transform 2019. We increased our return on equity by almost 3 times. We sold and reduced non-performing loans by 50 billion, and we reduced costs by 2.3 billion. So they are looking at us being sure that we can deliver our new plan, Team 23.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mustier. He is Jean-Pierre Mustier. He's the Chief Executive of UniCredit.